The Slate Culture Gabfest is brought to you by Progressive. Are you thinking more about how to tighten up your budget these days? Drivers who save by switching to Progressive save over $700 on average, and customers can qualify for an average of 6 discounts when they sign up. A little off your rate each month goes a long way. Get a quote today at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National annual average insurance savings by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2020 and May 2021. Potential savings will vary, discounts vary, and are not available in all states and situations. Hello, Culture Gabfest listeners. Before we start the show, I want to let you know about a story coming up a little later. It's from one of our sponsors, Charles Schwab. Schwab's passion for serving clients is inspired directly by the values of the people who work there. It's what sets them apart. Stick around to hear how Jim's approach as a Schwab financial consultant was shaped by values instilled by his father. Hello, Culture Gabfest listeners. Dana Stevens here. Before we get started, I wanted to let you know that right now Slate Plus is having a sale on membership. For a limited time, you can get 6 months of Slate Plus for just $29. That's 50% off the usual price. As a member, you'll get 0 ads on any of our podcasts, unlimited reading on the Slate site, and member-exclusive episodes and segments from our show and other shows like Slow Burn and the Political Gabfest. Slate's podcasts cover the topics that matter, from elections to social issues to historic court decisions. They also cover fun culture topics like hit songs, viral trends, and online debates. So if Slate podcasts have become an important part of your listening routine, we ask that you support our work and the work of our colleagues by joining Slate Plus. Sign up for Slate Plus now at slate.com/cultureplus to access all of Slate's content and support our work. Once again, that's only $29 for 6 months through October 28th. So sign up now at slate.com/cultureplus. Thanks.
I'm Stephen Metcalf, and this is the Slate Culture Gabfest Plastic Stormtrooper Codpiece Edition. It's Wednesday, October 19th, 2022. On today's show, Tar is the new movie from writer-director Todd Field, his first in 16 years. It stars Cate Blachett as a world-renowned conductor at the peak of her career. It's also a close study of the microdynamics of power. And then Star Wars, it's had a mixed relationship to the small screen, I think it's fair to say, but critics are hailing Andor as the franchise's best offering since Mandalorian. It's the prequel to Rogue One and returns Diego Luna as the title character. And finally, how do you sell 100 million books, tens of millions of LPs at least, then all but disappear from public consciousness? And by the way, as a poet, no less. The very strange story of Rod McKuen has been retold by Dan Coyce of Slate. He'll be joining us for our final segment. In the meantime, I'm joined by Julia Turner, Deputy Managing Editor of the LA Times. Julia.
Hello.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good.
Good. And of course, Dana Stevens is the film critic for Slate.com. Dana.
Stephen, can I just tell our listeners that I'm looking at you right now in all your three-dimensional, non-projected glory in the same room for the first time, definitely since the pandemic started.
I feel seen. I'm looking at you, too, in all of your three-dimensional glory and all the, hidden dimensions to come in the course of the conversation.
That shall unfurl as we speak.
Right. The dark labyrinth. Shall we make a show?
Let's do it.
All right. Here we go. Cate Blachett plays Tar, Lydia Tar, and yet that feels like the wrong verb. Blachett is herself an artist at the very peak of her renown and creative powers, as this movie makes just abundantly clear. And she, what's the word? Like she inhabits, becomes, just is, right? Bluntly is this woman conductor for the course of this 2-hour and 45-minute movie. She's a maestra, a term that Lydia Tar, the character, hates. A very rare thing still in the world of classical music. A woman at the podium with the baton, playing the orchestra with that kind of total elan of a Bernstein. And as Bernstein once said, playing the orchestra as her own musical instrument. As the movie meticulously shows and never tells us, she plays everything in her life this way. She's brilliant, funny, caustic, and very, very calculating. And she exists in one of the most rarefied spheres of all. But this sphere, along with everything else, including Lydia Tar, now exists in a new world, a world of social media, of an aesthetic refinement giving way to moral refinement, And so this movie asks us, can this woman and that sphere that she's thrived in coexist with, in the instance of this film and the story, Me Too? The movie also stars Noémie Merlant as the put-upon but worshipful personal assistant, and Nona Hoss as Lydia Tarr's first violinist and wife. Let's listen to a clip.
Time is the thing. Time is the essential piece of interpretation. You cannot start without me. See, I start the clock. My left hand, it shapes, but my right hand, the second hand, marks time and moves it forward. However, unlike a clock, sometimes my second hand stops, which means that time stops. Now, the illusion is that, like you, I'm responding to the orchestra in real time, making the decision about the right moment to restart the thing or reset it or throw time out the window altogether. The reality is that right from the very beginning, I know precisely what time it is and the exact moment that you and I will arrive at our destination together.
All right, Dana, let me start with you. First of all, how miraculously did they find someone who looks and sounds so much like Adam Gopnik to play Adam Gopnik?
Yeah, that is an important thing to know about the context of that exposition you just heard about her method, is that it's all, I think, very, very cleverly set up at the beginning with this real-time interview. It lasts quite a long time, that scene, right? And it's the movie's first extended scene. That's a conversation between Lydia Tarr on stage at the New Yorker Festival with Adam Gopnik playing Adam Gopnik, which establishes so much, at once about this kind of rarefied universe that she moves in. It allows her to, as we hear there, kind of lay out her philosophy of conducting. And it lets us get all of her backstory via, Adam Gopnik's somewhat worshipful, unflattering introduction. So you see, the space that she occupies in the world and the person that she imagines herself to be. And then in all kinds of complex and subtle ways that I still haven't completely figured out, maybe you guys can help me understand them, the movie takes that apart. But not in the way that you might think that it would. And I think that is my biggest defense of this movie to those who might. We can get into what some of the criticisms of it could be later, but I think that the thing that most surprised and delighted me about this movie, which I loved and gave a rave review in Slate, is that it's mysterious, right? It's ambiguous. Yet, it's not ambiguous in a sort of wishy-washy sort of way where it doesn't draw conclusions, but it is extremely open-ended. And it's really, really seductive. The character of Tarr is very seductive, and we're not seeing the visuals, of course, and hearing that clip, but the world she moves in is very seductive, right? I mean, she's kind of cosseted in all of this privilege, and the movie itself feels very upholstered. That was a word that I found in my notes. It feels like the movie itself has been sort of padded and protected as we first enter her world. And that's why, when less beautiful parts of her world start to intrude on the life she's created for herself, she has so far to fall. So there's something about this figure that she cuts at the beginning that's almost like a tragic or Shakespearean figure because she is in such a lofty place, right? She's a kind of royalty in classical music.
Yeah, absolutely. Julia, she's as Dana beautifully said, it's something, the feeling of the movie, is meant to convey what this rarefied world is like. It's plush. It's very insulated. It's filled with, very moneyed, good taste throughout. Anyway, let me throw to you. What did you make of this film?
Yeah, it's, first of all, just a mesmerizing object and viewing experience. I mean, Cate Blachett is almost never not on screen. So you're just watching this virtuoso in a film that is about artistic performance. And that adds kind of its own layer, I think. I also found myself a little puzzled by the project, not in a way that made me dislike the film. But if you say, revered director who's only made 2 movies and hasn't made any movies in 16 years, returns in the Me Too era to make a film about a charismatic artist who is accused of misconduct that is, I think, not sympathetic to her behavior, but quite empathetic and curious about her selfhood, personhood. She's certainly the protagonist. She's a villain, but she's not the villain, you know? Like, what is that project? Why is that what you're doing when you're back 16 years later? And what it's doing does not feel like polemic, does not feel political. Like, and also, why do you make that accused person a powerful woman, right? Like, I mean, to give us Cate Blanchett's Tar, which is an extraordinary cinematic gift, but that sort of seeds a kind of empathy and sympathy for this powerful artist because of the difficulty of the road of her getting there, that maybe swings it a bit more in the direction of sympathy for the abuser. But this movie kind of confounds your instinct to politicize it in a way that is quite odd for a movie that's asking you to like just inhabit the world of an abuser, basically, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's no real other conclusion, and makes you somewhat sympathetic to and curious about her mechanisms of abuse. And I found myself like entranced by the movie and then walking away from it having really enjoyed it, and also still kind of puzzled by and mulling over what I've seen and why this particular personhood was the subject of curiosity.
Yeah, I very, very similar set of responses. I mean, somehow the mood and the tone of it would have been shattered if there had been even a whiff of editorializing. Like, I think it works as this really deeply contemplative mood piece about a set of discrepancies, really, right? So if you look at her one way, she's arguably a heroic anachronism, right? She's peremptory, egomaniacal, has zero patience for, a culture that in many ways has become inimical to the premises of classical music, right? I mean, you go to a conservatory, it takes immense amounts of discipline. She is upholding a tradition and making it new in some sense as a woman who's the new, Leonard Bernstein in some sense. Nonetheless, the movie is not making a case for her at all. She's also, the movie's, I think, an extraordinary, very, very close-up microscopic look at how power operates and how abuses of power operate and how they occupy. They're both tiny, right? They're both micro and in a gray zone. And I think the movie, it's hard not to conclude that this person, and we never see, again, not to give too much away, we never see the specifics of the incident that's going to bring her, pretty inevitably, we feel is going to bring her down. We only catch it in these verite fragments in a way, right? It's part of the like, don't go too heavy on exposition in this film. Let the viewer figure it out. But what we do see is her repeating the process with a new, classical music ingenue. And then we see how she really does abuse her power, how she plays the world like her orchestra, but in this regard to feed her ego and her appetites, not to make great art. So there ought to be limits to your sympathy, but there's no polemicism here at all. It's just rigorously agnostic. The closest I came to feeling like there was at least something resembling, I wouldn't say editorial point. I wouldn't curse it with that. It's not didactic, but there is a moment, Dana, where I couldn't help thinking of the contrast between a very tendentiously edited YouTube video, right, which is very quick and pieces together some of her worst statements in a classroom and maybe publicly as well, into something that's both true and untrue, right? It points to something that really did happen, but is also misleading. The contrast between that and the film we're watching, right? That struck me as a moment where I hear the director here for the first time saying, pay attention to what I've done in relation to what social media can do.
Right. I mean, even in terms of the editing, because the scene that you mentioned that gets, re-edited and put up on, I think, TikTok as having been edited in a way, such a way as to make her look even more inappropriate and bigoted than she actually was being toward her student in that scene. We've seen that entire scene at the top of the movie. It's right after the Adam Gopnik scene. And if you notice, we see it without any edits. It's all done in one shot, that scene at Juilliard where she's giving a master class and she offends this one student.
I didn't notice that.
The idea of taking
Genius.
a single take scene and then showing how it gets chopped up, to be somewhat misrepresented on social media is a really fascinating aesthetic choice as well as a thematic one. But I mean, I'll be the devil's advocate and tell you the critiques of this movie that I've heard. One of my closest friends saw it and hated it and has not yet completely gotten back to me about why. I can't wait to have that conversation about why she and her partner both hated it. But I suspect that it has to do with something that I've seen some critics say about it as well, which is, does it stack the deck in favor of this really seductive and ultimately, as incredibly problematic as she is, very in some ways appealing, right, and magnetic main character by doing things like, showing us that edited TikTok video that we know has been molded to make her look maybe more guilty than she was in that moment. Also not really ever showing us her main accuser, right? Without giving anything away, there's this one woman from her past she's worked with who is the person who ends up making this accusation that starts to open up the Pandora's box of complaints against Tar. And except in a dream sequence where we obliquely see her face, we never see that person. We never hear her voice. We maybe see a few lines of an email that she's written, but she is someone who's off of the scene completely, right? So an argument could be made. I mean, obviously this is a very deliberate choice on Todd Field's part not to include that person, but could an argument be made that, the victim is being excluded and turned into someone who's so off of the scene that we sort of have no choice but to put our sympathies with Tar?
Yeah, I'm almost surprised there isn't more of that response in the public reception to the piece. It may be that it's in sort of a slow release and the folks who've seen it are mostly film critics who are admiring its craft. And maybe if it does become a bigger Oscar movie type, make that trajectory through the cultureverse, these debates will become louder as more people see the film. But I find myself kind of indignantly wanting to stick up for the movie in response to that critique, which is that I think you said it best, Steve, it's extremely curious about the mechanisms of power that allow abuse to persist, right? And it's quite revealing about them as well. And, some of the monsters we've read about were just monstrous and didn't have powers of personal seduction and charisma and genius, but some of the monsters were really talented and probably really good at manipulation and probably a little bit high on whatever power it is that propelled them to the stages where they were interviewed by the Adam Gopniks of their professional milieu, right? Like, the fact that it treats this monster as human never quite feels to me like an effort to excuse the monstrosity. It merely seems quite curious about how this kind of pain and suffering could come to be. So I don't think the movie is a love letter to an abuser that wants us to excuse her monstrosity in our admiration for her genius. I think it's almost the exact inverse of that. And I admire the kind of openness of its aperture in scrutinizing this world.
That's a good way of putting it. I mean, I guess the last thing I wanted to end on was just whatever you think of the protagonist in the end, see this movie. This is one of the best movies of the year. It's one of the most artistically ambitious movies of the year. And to me, it really announces Todd Field, who's only made 2 movies so far in his, more than 20-year career. And they're In the Bedroom and Little Children, already 2 very promising starts. But to me, this seals the deal on him as a major American filmmaker. So see it, if only for that reason alone.
Okay, we agree. See it. It's Tar and it's Cate Blachett. And right now it's in theaters, not streaming yet, but make the trip. It's worth it. All right, now is the moment in our podcast we hear a word about our sponsor, Dana Stevens. What you got?
Stephen, this week's Slate Culture Gabfest is brought to you by Masterclass. With Masterclass, you can learn from the world's best minds anytime, anywhere, and at your own pace. You can learn how to sing from Alicia Keys and Act from Samuel L. Jackson, and Cook from Gordon Ramsay. With over 150 classes from a range of world-class instructors, whatever you've always wanted to do is closer than you think. Masterclass was kind enough to offer me a credit to try out a class of my own. I have not used my credit yet, but I know who I want to use it for. Somebody I've talked about before on this show is one of the world's best talkers about movies, has a masterclass on their homepage. It's Martin Scorsese, and it looks like he has a 30-lesson introduction to filmmaking that includes some autobiographical material in some of the chapters, and also some close readings of movies, which I always love to hear Scorsese do, including Barry Lyndon, the noir classic Out of the Past, Jules and Jim, Hitchcock's Vertigo. I really can't wait to hear him wax Scorsesean on all of those movies. Get unlimited access to every class. And as a Culture Gabfest listener, you'll get 15% off an annual membership. Go to masterclass.com/culture now. That's masterclass.com/culture for 15% off Masterclass.
All right. Now is the moment in the podcast where we discuss various bits of business. We probably have some this week. Dana, what's up?
Steve, we have but one item of business this week, and that is to tell you about today's Slate Plus segment. This week, we're going to talk about the joy of being read to, or reading aloud oneself, either in person or via audiobook. This idea was inspired by an article we saw in The Atlantic titled An Ode to Being Read To by James Parker. In this article, Parker talks about how he cured his insomnia in part by listening to audiobooks. We were talking about our own experience of being read aloud to and reading aloud ourselves, and thought it might make for a good Slate Plus conversation. So if you're a Slate Plus member, stick around for that segment at the end of today's show. And if you're not a Slate Plus member, as always, you can sign up at slate.com/cultureplus. As I mentioned at the top of the show, Slate is having a sale on membership right now, so you'll get 6 months of Slate Plus for just $29, which is 50% off the usual price. If you're a member, you get ad-free podcasts, bonus content like the segment I just described, which many other shows offer as well, and, of course, unlimited access to all of the great writing on Slate.com. These memberships matter a lot to us. They keep the lights on, so please sign up today at slate.com/cultureplus. Once again, that's slate.com/cultureplus. Okay, Steve, onward.
Okay, well, Tony Gilroy wrote and directed the movie Michael Clayton, one of the better genre pictures of the last, 20 years. I don't think it's much older than that. He was the screenwriter on the Bourne movies. He directed the fourth installment. The man knows how to deliver a quality genre flick. Star Wars was hardly in need of reviving commercially when he co-wrote Rogue One, but he brought a newness to a series dominated by callbacks and comfort tropes. The movie was a huge and deserved hit. And now we have Andor, a TV show spinoff on Disney Plus. And I really mean it. It's a huge relief to see Gilroy's name all over it. It's a prequel to Rogue One. And Gilroy created the show, wrote many of the episodes, and no coincidence, it's getting stellar reviews. Why don't we listen to a clip? In the clip, Cassian Andor expresses contempt for the Empire, and he talks about how easy it is to steal from them. He plays upon their own hubris. The man he's talking to is a rebel leader played by the Swedish actor Stellan Skarsgård. Let's have a listen.
To steal from the Empire? What do you need? A uniform, some dirty hands, and an Imperial toolkit. They're so proud of themselves, they don't even care. They're so fat and satisfied, they can't imagine it.
Can't imagine what?
That someone like me would ever get inside their house, walk their floors, spit in their food, take their gear.
The arrogance is remarkable, isn't it? They don't even think about us.
Boss, I don't know you.
Fair enough, but I know you. These days will end, Cassian Andor. The way they laugh, the way they push through a crowd. The sound of that voice telling you to stop, to go, to move. Telling you to die. Rings in the air, doesn't it?
All right, Julia, let's start with you. Quite a surprise at this late hour to have a Star Wars franchisee do something, as critics are saying, fresh and kind of interesting and kind of grown up with the property. What do you think?
This is a great show. And it's a little bit of a slow burn. I mean, a la Tar, actually, weirdly. It's like very confident of its world. It situates you very deeply in a world. It seems funny to admire the world building of a Star Wars project, since obviously the Star Wars world is one of the most fully realized fictional worlds that there is. And yet, the production design of it just makes it feel real in a way that feels completely different from the, like, I'm wearing a plastic Stormtrooper codpiece kind of tone of the aesthetics of even the most beautiful other Star Wars movies. Like the kind of gritty realism and detail really sells something that is also thematically interesting, which is the show is essentially using the Star Wars mythology to ask the question, where does revolution come from, right? Mm. What causes people to resist power, to band together, to what causes them to do that as human beings, and not sort of like, how do they achieve it with, you know, driving the thing through the little thing to exploit the vulnerability and the big thing that the bad guys have, you know, like so much of the Star Wars films, they have sweeping characters, they have big vistas, they have funny scenes in bars, but fundamentally they're about how, right? How do you defeat the bad guy, and kind of spectacular acts of daring do. And this show is asking a much more interesting to me question, which is like, why? Why do you even try to defeat the bad guy when the bad guy seems so powerful? How do you even muster that impulse? Which is sort of the genesis of so many of these other films. And I will confess that I think I was sick or moving or I don't know what. I never saw Rogue One. I missed the week when we talked about it. And because all of my culture consumption is for the show, I thus never went back and watched it. And I do know what happened at the end of Rogue One. But man, I was impressed. I love this show.
Rogue One's terrific. Dana, what do you think? Did they build a better codpiece?
I mean, I agree with everything Julia says about this show's world building being unusual for the Star Wars universe. It doesn't have the Force. It doesn't have any Jedi Knights doing their thing. It doesn't have any of the legacy characters coming in yet. That may happen later, but it doesn't feel like fan service, and I really respect that. It's creating its own much sort of grittier, something out of a spy movie, right, or a heist movie. It's that kind of world that we're moving in more than a sci-fi epic. But I mean, I just have to say, until Stellan Skarsgård shows up, which is at the end of the second episode, I believe, I was struggling to stay awake through this show because it is so, and this may just be how my own taste in TV runs, is that it feels like it is doing, as I saw several critics writing about it say, it's trying to do that. This isn't a show, it's a 12-hour movie kind of structure, right? Where it's not really clear why any episode ends, where it ends. It's all telling one big story. And it doesn't hit TV beats in a way that you sort of feel like there's a cliffhanger for the next episode. Now, cliffhangers can be manipulative, right? They can, TV shows can overdo the formulaic beats for sure. But this felt a bit to me like an unshaped blob of words from Tony Gilroy's pen. And he himself has said, what I've been loving about doing this TV show, he's worked much more in film before, is that, I think he says this in an interview, everything that leaves my desk gets shot, right? That he's writing reams upon reams of world building and it's all getting turned into a show. I don't know. I feel like this show has a little bit that streaming disease of, it could have been a movie or a 5-hour show and that it's a bit sprawling and misshapen.
Yeah, it definitely accordioned out. And, I read one critic who said the kind of kick-in episode where the plot really begins to, the pace picks up and becomes more of a traditional genre picture is episode 3. And you certainly feel that. I liked it. I liked it a lot. I mean, to me, I saw Star Wars, the original one, when I was in whatever it was, 6th or 7th grade. I can't remember. I saw it 9 or so times in the theater back when that was an unusual thing to do. I mean, it just kind of remade my sense of the possibilities of a certain kind of movie and loved it. And it's been sort of nothing but disappointments ever since, in a way. And maybe I just kind of got older at the wrong time or something, or before my time, but the comfort of returning to the world, right? Like we're being sold the world, and the price of a theater ticket is the price of reentry into the world, and you get all of this like nostalgic throwback content. And over time, to me, it's just become, Dana, it's become like mixed cinema. It's like, and to cover that up, there's that horrible, slow-paced self-seriousness that these self-important genre pictures now have, like stretch it out to 3 hours and on and on. I think this Julia, I agree with you. I think this escapes that. I just think it's good TV. And the simple reason is that entry into this world is entry into a world. And it's not like a world that feels somehow real and internally cohesive with actual grown-ups fighting for things they believe in. And I think it kind of continues through to that moment when it clicks as a genre piece and the action starts. And as you say, Julia, something real has been set up. So by the time that happens, you are invested in it. And it not only does it show you, as you put it beautifully, not only does it show you why someone is willing to sublimate everything else about life to a cause, which Andor famously isn't willing to do. You know, it's kind of the hook for the whole show is that he's not. He's more like a Han Solo, vaguely Han Solo type, and that he's unaffiliated. But it also shows you how pompous and self-justifying, imperial power is in a way that actually I thought was also not cartoony. And so you're like, yeah, fuck the man, like stick it to them, send the ash can through the fucking storefront window. Let's burn this shit down. I mean, I don't know. I just thought like it kind of worked.
And honestly, the show is as curious about the like subtle mechanisms of power within the Empire as Tar is about Lydia Tar's manipulations. Like, I haven't seen I know that the prequels are famously full of like long Senate scenes about like tax arguments, and I will confess I haven't seen all three of them, but I don't know, just sort of the like office politics. I mean, the scenes within the Empire actually kind of look like Severance. It's like bitter office drones in a confusing white environment, like having petty squabbles. And I didn't finish Severance, but like there is as much texture to their debates, their motivations, and as much curiosity actually about like why it is that you would become an Empire true believer. There's psychological curiosity on that side as well. Dana, I will confess the first episode and the kind of breaks within the first three episodes are a little random, and I also fell asleep at one point when the portrait of childhood Cassian is like mysteriously crouching in the woods speaking in untranslated language. And I would just encourage you to keep watching. They've articulated that the show is sort of three episode chunks that are broken up to be more digestible. And the third episode is a sockdolager, and the thing just keeps gathering momentum from there. And I really think it's worthy of the Dana attention.
I agree. And once Stellan Skarsgård and Diego Luna meet up, also we haven't talked about Fiona Shaw, but she plays an important secondary character, and she is always welcome and great and everything.
Terrific.
I mean, the actors are so high caliber. Scene by scene, the writing is really good. There's never a moment when I cringed at the writing or thought, this is hokey or awful or anything like that. My complaints would have more to do with sort of form and structure and padding. Like, we don't need to see so much of the young Cassian. We get it. He had a traumatized childhood. I'd rather stick with the Diego Luna character. But in relation to what you guys were saying a moment ago about investigating systems of power and what would motivate you to be, an evil representative of the Empire, I really love that secondary character, Cyril Karn, who's the sort of officious suck up to the bad guy,
Absolutely.
right? He's basically almost like an Adolf Eichmann figure, right? Like from the Hannah Arendt investigation of Nazism. He's sort of this middle manager who's trying to move up and trying to articulate the philosophy. And there's a moment he gives a really wan pep talk to a bunch of Empire soldiers, and it clearly doesn't go over well at all. That's not something that we often see in the Star Wars universe, right? Is sort of, the toadying member of the Empire who's trying to work his way up. And the actor who plays him, I should shout him out, is Kyle Soller. But yeah, stuff
Terrific.
like that is what gives this a little more texture than, The Mandalorian or something like that, and makes me feel like, yeah, I'll keep watching.
We also have to shout out before we adjourn this segment that the music for Andor is from official MFOP musical friend of the program, Nicholas Bertel. And so that was an additional layer of enjoyment for me.
All right. Well, the show is Andor. I think we all, more or less liked it. You should check it out. It's on Disney Plus. Okay, moving on. All right. Now's the moment in the podcast we keep the lights on here at Slate. Dana, what do we have?
Steve, the world, like business, is changing fast. So when you need a new hire for your business, you need to find them ASAP. For top talent fast, you need Indeed. Indeed is the hiring platform where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. Don't spend hours on multiple job sites looking for candidates with the right skills when you can do it all with Indeed. Find top talent fast with Indeed's suite of powerful hiring tools like Indeed Instant Match, assessments, and virtual interviews. Hate waiting? Indeed's U.S. data shows over 80% of Indeed employers find quality candidates whose resume on Indeed matches their job description the moment they sponsor a job. Indeed knows when you're growing your own business, you have to make every dollar count. That's why when you sponsor a job, you only pay for quality applications from resumes in our database matching your job description. Visit Indeed.com/culture to start hiring now. Just go to Indeed.com/culture, Indeed.com/culture. Terms and conditions apply. Cost per application pricing not available for everyone. Need to hire? You need Indeed. It's time to reboot your credit card with Apple Card. Apple Card is designed to help you pay less interest. Unlike other cards, it estimates how much interest you'll owe and suggests moves to help you pay off your balance faster. All so you can keep more of your money. Apply now in the Wallet app on iPhone and start using it right away. Subject to credit approval. Interest estimates on the payment wheel are illustrative only and may not fully reflect actual interest charges on your account. Estimates are based on your posted account balance at the time of the estimate and do not include pending transactions or any other purchases you may make before the end of the billing period.
Okay, well, Rod McKuen sold millions of poetry books in the 1960s and 70s. He was a regular on late-night TV, released dozens of albums, wrote songs for Sinatra, and was nominated for 2 Oscars. So writes Slate's own Dan Coyce in Slate. Dan, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me on this beautiful, sensual experience.
It's too early.
Don't get off too soon, okay? Let's pace ourselves. That's actually an appropriate joke. We'll get there, Dan. We'll get there. Anyway, I love your piece on the poem Rod McKuen. I encountered him repeatedly when I was young. Let me continue quoting a little bit, and then we'll turn to Rod himself. He was a flashpoint in the battle between highbrow and lowbrow, with devotees revering his plain-spoken honesty and Dick Cavett mockingly calling him the most understood poet in America. It's wonderful. Every year on his birthday, he sold out Carnegie Hall. Okay, Dan, take it away. We have a recording from one of those Carnegie Hall birthday parties.
In this recording, Rod's reciting his most famous and beloved poem, A Cat Named Sloopy, a sentimental but exciting story of Rod's years in New York when his beloved cat greeted him every night when he returned from his erotic adventures, his dalliances with Ben or Lillian. But then one winter, Rod stays away too long, and when he returns, Sloopy's gone, and he searches for Sloopy, screaming her name through the dark New York City streets. But he never finds her, and here's what he says.
But once upon a time, in New York's jungle in a tree, before I went into the world in search of other kinds of love, nobody owned me but a cat named Sloopy. Looking back, perhaps she's been the only human thing that ever gave back love to me.
I'm really sorry, guys. I'm going to need to take a moment. JK. Dan, it's schmaltz heaped upon schmaltz, these kind of, was it Montevani strings in the background? I can't remember, but just like lachrymose excess. I also love that you're hawking a poem about a cat named Sloopy at the heyday of a dog named Snoopy. It's just incredible that this was as ubiquitous. 321. It's incredible that this was as ubiquitous as it was, but almost more incredible. I knew nothing about McKuen other than seeing his name everywhere when I was 10 years old, was how he became Rod McKuen. It's really an astonishing backstory. I think we should start there.
He spent his teens and 20s into his 30s convinced that he was eventually going to become famous, making up for a truly miserable childhood. He, bounced in and out of juvenile detention centers. He was abused by his family and by his stepfather. And in the wake of that, he became convinced he was destined for fame. And he spent his 20s basically pursuing it any way he possibly could. He briefly signed a contract with a movie studio in Hollywood and played all these like second banana roles in forgettable teen movies. While he was there, he would write his own fan letters from fake teenagers and send them to the studio every day. He recorded album after album of novelty songs or beat satires or songs about mummies and tried to make hits with those. And eventually he actually achieved an enormous success with this very strange album called The Sea, which was his poetry about love and lust, read against the backdrop of, as you say, sort of Mantovani strings and also ocean sounds, the #1 makeout record of the late 60s, an album that rivaled Fleetwood Mac's Rumors in catalog sales at its peak.
Do you know my friend, the sea? He watches everything we do. You, rolling over in your beach bank sleep. Me chasing seagulls down the dunes.
And then he finally truly became insanely famous in the late 60s with poetry, with these Random House hardcovers and paperbacks of poems that just flowed out of him with the great ease of the untrained sentimentalist. And they really connected with this sort of vast middle of 1960s culture, not the hippies exactly and not the squares exactly, but everyone else.
Dan, you segued perfectly into what I wanted to ask you about, which is just this little thing you throw off about, 400,000 people went to Woodstock, but what about everybody else in that demographic and what they were doing? And I was thinking, as someone who was just a small child when this stuff was popular, that it speaks to and is in conversation with a whole style of kind of middle-brow sensuality that was sort of the thing in that period, that there was sort of, I don't know, I'm even thinking of things like William Shatner's spoken word albums or things like that, right? There was a certain kind of appetite for high culture that was channeled through more middle-brow culture. That would even, I guess, go toward, I don't know, sort of pop classical, going to see the Pops Orchestra or something like that. This is all very inchoate, but
hooked on Bach.
Right. Like, could you talk a little bit about that? Like, I see Rod McKuen, who I remember being on people's shelves, not my parents. They would have been in like the Dick Cavett category of people mocking Rod McKuen, but definitely omnipresent along with like Jonathan Livingston Seagull, right? And books like that. And I just wonder how you see him as fitting into that, part of 60s, 70s pop culture that we've now put in a closet because it's sort of embarrassing to remember.
Well, one of the great lessons of reporting and writing this piece was how transgressive he seemed to people coming out of the, early to mid 60s, people who were not fully on board with the sexual revolution, but who were still feeling sort of stultified by the conventional culture of the day and thought there must be something else other than this, old-timey way of men and women and men and dealing with each other. And so for them, the sexual freedom and the gentle license and the kind of soft focus horniness of Rod McKuen's work really meant something. It really touched them, and trying to, as a reader, tap into what really mattered to those readers at the time, even as I, reading Rod McKuen's poetry, feel intensely embarrassed, was like a useful lesson for me in how eras approach the art that really means something to them.
It just feels impossible for something like this to be such a sensation right now, and yet not, as you write about in your piece. We live in the era of the Instagram poet Rupi Kaur, and there is sometimes hunger for a type of poetry that is more direct and sincere and about emotions written in verse than perhaps whatever's being published in poetry in any given day. But reading this piece, I was like, what is this alien planet that was only a few decades ago? Like, what the hell? Like, it's so hard to imagine the particular set of cultural environments that would have this. Like, it does feel different, Rupi Kaur on Instagram versus like this being at Carnegie Hall annually and being, on the covers of magazines and sitting on talk show couches. Like,
yeah, but she sells books not in Rod McKuen quantities, but she's the closest approximation to him that we have at this point.
Yeah, but is it quite so horny and goopy? Isn't it a little bit more self-actualizing? Like, it feels. I've when I read her stuff, I'm like, all right, that doesn't make me feel like an alien in my own land in the way they're reading his poems too.
That's definitely true. And yes, the self-actualization part of it, I think, is crucial. What McKeown's poetry was almost always about was about like loneliness and desperation in a way that when you read it now, understanding more about his life story, he was gay. He presented himself as sort of cheerfully omnisexual, as one of the people I talked to, Stephanie Burt, said, small r romantic. But truly, he was gay. He had a life partner who he lived with for 50 years, a very supportive man, seemingly, who put up with a lot from Rod McKuen. But he couldn't, in that era, he didn't feel he could go the Liberace route. And so he just went this other route of not really talking about his true life and his true loves, introducing his partner for decades as his adopted brother, and feeling lost and at sea even in the years when he was in this relationship. And so when you read the poetry through that lens and then think of it as a kind of voice for this lost, yearning middle class, it makes a lot of sense, but it also doesn't seem like anything that would ever play today.
No, not at all. I mean, Dan, this strikes me as a paradigmatic case of something that touches a public nerve. No one quite knew it was there until the nerve got touched, and goes on to become a commercial sensation. As you detail in the hundreds of millions of sales, and the opinion makers. Elite opinion makers find it just totally mystifying. So it was contemporaneous to McKeown that Cavett made his jibe, and Nora Ephron, as you point out, the middlebrow's middlebrow in some sense, dismissed it as middlebrow, and just heaping scorn on it, even as he's producing more and backing the truck up to the bank. I was very interested in your, if you will, McKeown-esque journey in your process of discovery with both the poetry and the biography and the people who've attempted to keep a flame alive. He's found an awful lot of loneliness and abandonment in his afterlife in a way. And at some level, if I read your wonderful piece correctly, you forged a kind of respect for this brow-destroying kind of quasi-artist who, whatever else is true, like gave solace to millions and millions of people.
And was truly sincere in his work. And I think that's, in the end, what touched me about him. A lot of the critics of that era, the highbrow critics, what they hated most about him was not only that he was successful, but that they believed him to be knowingly schnookering all of these idiots who were buying his work. That he was insincere, that he was just giving the public what they wanted. A somewhat ridiculous assertion when you think of it, when you think of how weird the thing is that he was producing. And as you say, the nerve he was touching that no one even knew needed to be touched until he hit it. But it really seemed to me in talking, for example, to his biographer, Barry Alfonso, and in talking to fans and in listening to and reading the work and knowing what I learned about his biography, that in fact, this was the purest expression of how he actually felt about his life and the world. At times it was shallow in the way that he was a somewhat shallow guy, but it was never calculated. Even in the late years when he was pushing out book after book of aphorism, and some of which he didn't even write, in a way, even those were true reflections of the person that he had been and had become, living in a Beverly Hills mansion, shuffling around in his bathrobe. And so I had this grudging respect in the end for a guy who could make art of a sort that reflected his innermost fears and passions, could connect to an enormous audience for whom that art meant a lot, and who could, in the end, withstand a lot of withering scorn from, like hoity-toity highbrows. That's a great way to get me on your side, even as I feel like a hoity-toity highbrow sneering at your work. And it gave me a lot of respect for this lost America where something like this could become a huge hit, could become hugely popular. And a person like this, who, when you watch videos of him, is so obviously a weirdo, could become insanely ubiquitous.
Oh, man, that is beautifully said. All right, well, the piece is Rod McKuen was the best-selling poet in American history. What Happened by Dan Kois. It's up on Slate. It's a terrific, terrific piece of cultural journalism and criticism. Dan, thanks for coming back to the show, but two very quick bits of business before we go that I forgot. Just to reassure the listeners that my juvenile get off joke actually is appropriate to your piece. And also tell us the pub date for your forthcoming novel, Vintage Contemporaries.
Rod was all about making love in his poems, and he was about the slow burn for sure.
Listen
Maybe
to the warm, Steve.
Burn.
Listen to the warm.
I really encourage you to listen to the warm. So it was indeed appropriate, and the novel comes out January 17th. It's called Vintage Contemporaries. Thank you for being its greatest on-air advocate, Steve.
Yeah, brilliant. All right, thanks for coming on, Dan. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks.
This podcast is brought to you by Slate Studios and Charles Schwab. The people at Charles Schwab go the extra mile to help clients on their investment journey. It's part of who they are. Jim is a Schwab financial consultant. His dad was a contractor who prided himself on providing great work at a fair price.
I can remember installing windows with my dad and would have to go order the windows from the distributor. And we could have bought cheaper windows. He's like, no, I don't want to buy those. If I put those in, winter's going to come. They're going to be cold. My dad instilled in me, be proud of offering a good quality product at a fair price.
Jim brings this integrity to how he serves his clients each and every day.
I know from 20 years of doing this that if you just help people and give them the guidance that they're looking for, it'll work out in the long run. They don't have to buy anything from you today. They don't have to pay you any money or commissions today. People are looking for good, honest, quality, intelligent service. I always put the people before the money. Always.
At Charles Schwab, they're not just financial people. They're people too. With 24/7 support and one-on-one guidance from financial consultants, Schwab offers the tools to help you pursue your financial goals. Learn more about what sets Schwab apart at schwab.com/whyschwab.
All right, now is the moment in our podcast when I look deep into Dana Stevens' eyes, face to face, and I say, are you ready to endorse?
I feel very Rod McKuen right now. Listen to the warm in my eyes. So yes, I'm ready to endorse. And first of all, I have a musical endorsement, but before I got into it, I wanted to thank whatever listener it was that for our last summer strut sent us the song by CMAT, Kira Mary Alice Thompson, because as you'll know, if you follow me on Instagram, because of that person introducing me to this wonderful Irish singer-songwriter who has just one album so far, it came out this year, I went to see her live with my daughter on her recent tour of the States. She played at the Mercury Lounge in New York, and it was such a great, intimate venue to see her. And I had thought, based on her album, that it might be kind of a low-key show, that it would be sort of a folky acoustic situation. But she actually had this really tight band and was an incredibly charismatic stage presence and just brought the house down. It was so much fun. So thank you to whoever introduced me to CMAT. And in return, I want to introduce you to some of my much older music, which did not come out this year, but came out sometime before 1521, which was the year he died. And this is actually, it was by pure chance, just as that was a chance encounter with some listeners' taste. I found this CD on the street, one of those things where somebody's giving away a box of CDs,
So
right,
good.
on their stoop. Went through, pulled some classical CDs. They sat around for months not being listened to. And then just because it had a beautiful Fra Angelico painting on the cover, I grabbed this CD of Josquin Desprez. I hope I'm saying his name right. This is a French-Flemish composer. Not much is known about his life. But he wrote this beautiful, beautiful choral religious music that's all sort of motets with overlapping voices. And I don't have the musical tar vocabulary to describe why it's great, but it's very musically complex. And it's wonderful thinking music. You know, Julie and I have talked before about how listening to Bach is a great way to put yourself in this sort of thinking, writing mode. Well, I wrote yesterday for hours to this album by Josquin Desprez. It's called Stabat Mater and Motets. Those are the two pieces that are on it. And the group playing his music is called La Chapelle Royale. So, yes, found on the street. Love it. If you want to get into some Renaissance listening, you could start there.
Lovely. All right, Julia, what do you have?
Okay, well, my viewing of the film Tar led me to re-encounter an incredible New York Times obituary. So there's a character in Tar, Elliot Kaplan, who's sort of an investor, but also a conductor, but kind of an Arabiste. But who is he? Like, he seems extremely specific, but the film doesn't really dilate on who or why he is or why he sometimes conducts, but is not really a full conductor, what his entree is into the world, what his power dynamic is with her. And he's very well sketched and very specifically sketched. And I learned in reading about the film that he seems to be modeled on this figure, Gilbert E. Kaplan, who died in 2016, who I will read here from Margalit Fox's review, was a financial publisher who had an accidental second career as an international symphony conductor, despite the fact that he could scarcely read music and possessed a concert repertoire of exactly one piece. He could only conduct Mahler's Second Symphony. So it's, the whole of Tar is about conducting Mahler's Fifth. But he essentially started this magazine, The Institutional Investor, was like a finance journalist and entrepreneur, and then decided that he must conduct this one piece, like paid a bunch of money to get a choral group and a symphony and like rented a room so that he could like practice with these professionals. He had a closed performance with the stipulation that there be no reviews for like 2,500 of his friends, that he put on for, a six-figure sum that was just his own indulgence of his own curiosity. And then one of the attending critics broke the embargo and said it was great. And it turned into this crazy career where he like went all over the world conducting just this one symphony, but in the most prestigious places. He conducted the Vienna Philharmonic, the London Symphony, the LA Philharmonic, the St. Louis Symphony, and in an outing that became the subject of a headline-making fracas, the New York Philharmonic. Anyway, this entire obituary is an extraordinary portrait, and although I would not change anything about Tar, it did lead me to wonder, like, why not make a movie about this guy?
Didn't people ever ask him, "Hey, do you know this tune?" I mean, why wasn't he?
No,
challenged?
they knew he was. No, he was transparent about being this Arabiste, but his curiosity was deeply sincere, and a lot of serious music people felt that he knew and understood this particular piece, which is apparently an incredibly complicated musical piece, like as well as the people who know all the music in the way that the people in the film did. So anyway, I would encourage everyone to go read Gilbert E. Kaplan, publisher and improbable conductor, dies at 74. And to contemplate the Tar sequel that's just about this dude.
Oh, that is so great. That is so good. All right. So we found on this show, we found our way to this very definite sweet spot, which is the music of the jazz pianist Red Garland. And what makes it so tricky to find other artists or records that you know hit that same sweet spot is that it's so utterly uniformly reliable. You can just click on any Red Garland recording and out comes the most elegant jazz piano. It is both music that you can pay intent attention to because Garland was an extraordinary musician, a really, really gifted, really wonderful musician, arranger. It's not without a distinctive flavor at all. You can also put it on and kind of ignore it. And in my lifelong struggle to please and earn the respect of Julia Turner, I feel like Red Garland is my one unequivocal victory. And since then, I've struggled to find more jazz records that have this same oddly bewitching charm. And Julia, I think I found another one.
Okay.
So I think McKoy Tyner, and this is what's great about McKoy Tyner, who I've endorsed before, other works by before. The great thing about McKoy Tyner is that he's a musician's musician, had enormous success, but not as the leader, right? So he's, I think, probably most famous for the work he did on some iconic John Coltrane records. But he had a wonderful career of his own, playing his own stuff. He has a record called Nights of Ballad and Blues. It's so good. It's so good. And I think maybe, just maybe, it hits the Red Garland sweet spot. This is a record from 1963. You know, jazz, to its enormous credit, like really grew as an art form, and it became political in some ways. It became compositionally daring and very challenging to a listener's ear. It was saying, screw you to like, we're cocktail music while you sit there and have a drink and pay no attention to us. Like, you know, but that said, like, this is just a beautiful, gentle, in its way inconspicuous album, but with all these wonderful voicings and tonal complexities. I just think it's a great record. So check it out, McKoy Tyner, Nights of Ballad and Blues.
Okay, Steve, I can't wait to listen to this. I feel like both of you have name-checked some of my favorite previous endorsements in touting these endorsements this week. So if I'm going to get new dinner music and new thinking music in one round of endorsements, like that's major. So I'm very excited to check this out. But I need to correct the record. It is not only Red Garland who you have successfully put over into this category of like listenable but not insipid jazz. The Out of the Blue album by Sonny Red that you recommended a couple months ago is a total winner. Like everyone should go check that out. It's different in character, but similarly like mood setting, but not in a Rod McKuen way, and you know, merits attention, and also will happily play second fiddle while you just chop onions, if that's what you wanted to do.
Yeah, great record.
So super excited to check out this new tip.
All right, well, thanks for that, Julia, and thanks for this great show.
Thank you.
Dana, thanks so much. How fun and kind of, I don't know, it's just like brisker somehow to be actually physically in the presence of your colleague.
Agree. May it be the start of a new era.
Excellent. You'll find links to some of the things we talked about today at our show page. That's slate.com/culturefest, and you can email us at culturefest@slate.com. Our introductory music is by the composer Nicholas Bertel. Our production assistant this week was Jessica Balderrama. Our producer, of course, is Cameron Drews. For Dana Stevens and Julia Turner, I'm Stephen Metcalf. Thank you so much for joining us. We will see you soon.